I severed ties with my freeloading sister, but she retaliated by stealing my identity. My parents enabled her behavior, yet I chose to walk away, prioritizing my self-respect over their toxicity. You know how some people joke about becoming the family bank? For me, it was no joke, it was my reality for 5 long years. I had been my sister, Rachel's, unofficial financial supporter, covering her rent, utilities, groceries, and even the occasional treat for her daughter, Mia. All of this while I worked a blue-collar job where overtime was not a luxury but a necessity. Rachel hadn't always been this way. She once had a husband and a semblance of stability, but when her temper became too much for him to handle, he left, leaving her with a mountain of bills and a child. That was when the family baton of responsibility was handed to me. Our parents, enjoying their retirement years, made it clear they had no intention of stepping in. "You're young and capable, Mark," my mom told me when I brought it up. "You can handle it." So, I did. I tightened my belt, worked extra shifts, and put my own dreams on hold to ensure Rachel and Mia didn't go without. I convinced myself it was the right thing to do, who else would help them? But then, a year ago, Rachel landed a decent job. It wasn't glamorous, but it came with a paycheck, benefits, and the chance to finally get back on her feet. I thought I'd help out a little longer until she adjusted, but as the months went by, I noticed something troubling. Rachel wasn't struggling anymore. At family dinners, she would casually mention her latest shopping spree or the new gadget she bought for Mia. At first, I stayed silent, thinking she deserved a little fun after everything she had been through. But last week, she crossed a line. We were at Mom and Dad's house for dinner: Rachel, Mia, our parents, and Uncle Tom. The usual chaos ensued, with Mia refusing to eat her vegetables while Mom and Dad chatted about their latest vacation. Then Rachel dropped a bombshell. "I'm thinking about buying this amazing handbag," she said, showing off a picture on her phone. "It's only $500, but it's designer." I paused mid-bite, trying to process her words. "You're considering spending $500 on a handbag while I'm still covering your rent?" I asked, my tone calm but firm. Her response? She laughed. "Oh, don't be so cheap, Mark." Something inside me snapped. 5 years of sacrifice, missed vacations, nights out, and personal desires, all for her, and I was the one being called cheap? I set down my fork, my appetite vanished. "Cheap?" I echoed, my voice icy. "Let's talk about cheap, Rachel. Like how I've been paying your rent while you buy handbags, or how I've sacrificed everything while you pretend to be struggling." You know what? I'm done. The room fell silent. Mom and Dad suddenly found their mashed potatoes fascinating, while Rachel stared at me in disbelief. "What do you mean, done?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "I mean no more rent, groceries, or handouts," I replied, standing up. "You're on your own." Uncle Tom leaned back in his chair, whistling low. "Way to go, Mark," he said, patting my back. "You don't owe anyone anything." Rachel sputtered, trying to come up with a response, but I didn't wait. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, pausing only to say, "And if you think this is just temporary anger, you're wrong. It's time for you to grow up, Rachel." I left, my heart racing. Relief and rage battled for control within me. 5 years as the family bank, and this was how I was treated. Little did I know, the fallout from that dinner was just the beginning, and what happened next would test me more than I ever imagined. Rachel's silence was unnerving. Days turned into a week, and I heard nothing from her, no angry texts, no guilt-tripping voicemails, nothing. It felt too quiet, like the calm before a storm. I kept telling myself I had done the right thing, but the nagging feeling that something was brewing kept me on edge. That something arrived late one night in the form of a knock on my door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see my parents standing there, their faces a mix of irritation and self-righteous indignation. "We need to talk about Rachel," my mom stated without preamble, stepping inside as if she had been invited. Dad followed, closing the door behind him. I crossed my arms and leaned against the kitchen counter. "Do we?" "Because I think I've said everything," I left, muttering under my breath, but I felt a strange sense of relief. For once, I had stood my ground. That relief lasted exactly 2 days. Out of the blue, Rachel contacted me. I considered ignoring her message, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries. Her tone was surprisingly light. "Just wanted to let you know I'm moving out of the apartment next month." "Why?" I frowned, unable to hide my confusion. "Can't afford it without me?" "Oh, I can afford it," she replied, her tone dismissive. "I just don't want to. I'm moving back in with Mom and Dad." That hit me like a punch to the gut. "What?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "They offered," she said nonchalantly, as if it were no big deal. "They said they didn't want Mia to suffer because of your little tantrum. So, I'm putting my stuff in storage and moving into the guest room. Should be cozy." I was at a loss for words. The thought of Rachel lounging at my parents' house, rent-free and responsibility-free, while they made excuses for her, was almost too much to bear. "Oh, and one more thing," she added, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You might want to check your credit report. Just a heads up." My stomach dropped. "What the hell does that mean?" She laughed. "You'll find out. Bye, Johnny." I hung up and immediately logged into my credit card account. What I saw made my blood run cold. There it was, a new credit card account in my name, with a staggering balance. Thousands of dollars charged to stores I had never visited, all opened within the last 6 months. Rachel had taken more than just my money, she had stolen my identity. My hand shook as I stared at the screen, bewilderment and betrayal swirling in my chest. Helping her was one thing, but being made a fool of was something else entirely. It wasn't just about cutting her off anymore, this was war. 2 weeks later, I was still grappling with the fallout from discovering Rachel's credit card fraud. I spent hours on the phone with credit card companies and a lawyer, and I filed a police report not because I wanted to, but because my lawyer insisted I had to. I knew it would complicate things, but Rachel had left me no choice. Then came the shocker. I was at work, trying to focus on a project, when my phone vibrated with a text from Uncle Tom. "Did you know your parents took out a loan? Thought you should hear it from me." A chill ran down my spine. I called Uncle Tom immediately. He didn't mince words. "They're paying off the rest of Rachel's debt," he stated plainly. "She went crying to them after you cut her off, and they decided to bail her out. They took a loan against the house to do it." My jaw clenched. "You've got to be kidding me." "I wish I was," Tom replied. "They didn't want you to find out, but I figured you deserved to know." I hung up, my blood boiling. They had gone behind my back, enabling Rachel once again and jeopardizing their own financial stability in the process. Worse, they expected me to remain silent and pick up the pieces when everything fell apart. That evening, I drove straight to my parents' house. When I walked in, they were sitting in the living room with Rachel, laughing as if everything were perfect. As soon as they saw me, their mood shifted. "Mark," my mom said cautiously. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here because I just found out about the loan," I explained, my voice quivering with barely restrained rage. "Care to explain?" Mom's face turned pale, but Dad stood up, his expression hardening. "We did what we had to do," he explained. "Mia doesn't deserve to suffer because of your stubbornness." "And what about you?" I shot back, glaring at Rachel. "What's your excuse this time? Stealing my identity wasn't enough?" Rachel crossed her arms, her voice defiant. "I did what I had to do, Mark. You cut me off. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to grow up," I retorted, my frustration boiling over. "You're an adult, not a child. It's time you took responsibility for your own life." The tension in the room was palpable. My parents exchanged glances, and I could see the discomfort etched on their faces. They had chosen to enable Rachel, and now they were facing the consequences of their actions. I felt a mix of anger and disappointment, not just hadn't anticipated, I was beginning to rediscover myself. I snapped, but instead of standing my ground, Rachel had run back to our parents, dragging them down with her. I turned to my parents, my voice rising. And you let her. You're willing to jeopardize your own future just to enable her lies and manipulation. Do you even hear yourselves? We're protecting our family, my mom stated forcefully. No, you're enabling her, I shot back. And I'm done being a part of it. Don't you dare walk out on this family. Dad shouted as I turned for the door. My heart pounded in my chest, and I paused, turning back to face them. You already walked out on me the moment you decided my sacrifices didn't matter. I've been your scapegoat long enough. From now on, you can clean up your own messes. Rachel smirked. You'll be back, Mark. You always come back. I met her gaze with a steely resolve. Not this time. I walked out and slammed the door behind me. My phone buzzed incessantly with angry texts from my parents and Rachel for the rest of the night, but I ignored them all. For the first time in years, I wasn't burdened by their expectations. I wasn't their banker, fixer, or fool anymore. I was free. This wasn't just disobedience, it was emancipation, and I had no intention of turning back. The fallout was immediate. Within hours of leaving my parents' place, the family group chat exploded with messages from my dad and Rachel, each more dramatic than the last. Mom, you're pulling our family apart. Mark, you were raised to be better than this. Rachel, Ellie is heartbroken. You're a selfish coward. I put down my phone, tightened my jaw, and went for a walk. The night was crisp and peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos raging in my mind. I felt raw, angry, sad, and relieved. For years, I had carried the weight of my family's expectations, and now that I had let go, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. The next day, I received an unexpected call from Uncle Tom. Heard about what happened, he said sternly. Good for you, kid. Someone needed to stand up to them. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thanks, Tom. I don't feel like the hero right now. You're not the hero, he stated bluntly. You're just the only one with any sense. His words provided me with a sense of validation, but the days that followed were still difficult. My parents had stopped calling, but the silence was anything but comfortable. I knew they were furious, and I knew it wasn't over. Rachel, however, wasn't as quiet. She took to social media, posting vague yet pointed messages. It's sad when the people who are supposed to love you the most are the first to abandon you, she wrote. My personal favorite was, family is supposed to be forever. Guess not for everyone. The genuine breaking point came a week later when my parents invited me to dinner. Despite my better judgment, I went. Perhaps I still hoped for a chance at reconciliation. When I arrived, the atmosphere was tense. Rachel was already at the table, wearing a smug grin, while Ellie was nowhere to be found. We need to talk, Dad said, his voice heavy. About how I'm the bad guy? I inquired, taking a seat. About how you've handled this, Mom said, her voice harsh. You didn't have to humiliate Rachel or threaten her with the police, Dad retorted. She committed fraud. I shot back, my voice rising. What did you expect me to do? Clap and say, great job, sis? You could have handled it privately, Dad insisted. Privately? I scoffed. You mean quietly, so no one would see how you've enabled her for years? Rachel finally spoke up, her voice filled with rage. You're just bitter because I don't need you anymore. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. You've never needed me, Rachel. You've just used me. And now you've dragged them down with you. Mark, Mom replied, her voice softening. Please, for Ellie's sake. This isn't about Ellie. I interjected. This is about you refusing to let her face the consequences of her actions. And I'm done being a part of it. I fled without looking back. That night, I sat on my couch, rehearsing the confrontation in my mind. I hadn't felt this way in years, tranquility. In the months that followed, my life changed in ways I never anticipated. Initially, the silence from my parents and Rachel was deafening. For years, I had been their safety net, their go-to problem solver, and their financial support. Now, it was just me. The absence of their constant demands felt unusual, but it also allowed for something I hadn't experienced in a long time: serenity. I began to fill my days with activities that brought me joy. I finally joined a recreational basketball league after putting it off for years due to job and family obligations. I took a weekend trip to the mountains, a dream I had postponed so many times that it had begun to feel like a fantasy. Standing by the shore of a peaceful lake, with no one texting me about bills, rent, or guilt-tripping me into solving their problems, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Work became a source of pride once again. Without the shadow of family troubles hanging over me, I poured my energy into a new project at work and received a promotion within 3 months. My co-workers noticed the change. "You seem lighter," one of them commented over a team meal. "Like you're finally breathing." They were right. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Uncle Tom, my dependable sounding board, remained a constant presence in my life. One evening, he lifted a glass and smiled as we dined together. "Here's to you, kid, for finally learning how to say no." I chuckled, but his words stayed with me. Saying no had been the most difficult thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most important. Unsurprisingly, Rachel continued to play the victim. From what I heard, she was still living at my parents' house, relying on them for assistance and avoiding responsibility. Mom and Dad became increasingly frustrated, but their pride prevented them from acknowledging they had made a mistake. The true surprise came from Ellie. One afternoon, she called me from her mother's phone. "Uncle Mark," she spoke softly, "can I come visit you? Mom says you're mad at us, but I miss you." Hearing her voice made my heart ache a little, but it also filled me with hope. "Of course, you're welcome to visit," I replied kindly. "You're always welcome here." She came over the following weekend, and we spent the day baking cookies, watching movies, and discussing school. As she hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "Thanks for being my favorite uncle." That moment reminded me why I had fought so hard to establish boundaries. It wasn't just about protecting myself, I wanted to show Ellie what self-respect looked like. The lesson I learned was simple yet profound: standing up for oneself is not selfish, it is essential. Family does not mean being a doormat, it denotes respect, support, and mutual caring. If those elements are missing, it is acceptable to walk away. The distance from my family was difficult, but it provided me the opportunity to create a life I could be proud of. I wasn't simply surviving anymore, I was thriving. For the first time in years, I felt like I was right where I was supposed to be. One evening, as I stood on my balcony watching the sunset, I understood something important: I hadn't lost a family, I had regained myself. And that was a trade I would gladly make again.